Good evening, I'm Larry King and this is Larry King Live. We have an exciting show for you today. We have 3 guests who will provide analyses on the recent financial crisis. First we have Johnny G, who recently wrote a book, Implications of Positive Accounting Theory. Mr. G, how are you doing? Hi Larry, I'm doing well thanks. By the way, you can call me John. John, your book discusses positive accounting theory. What is that? Positive accounting theory, or PAT for short, is a theory that describes what is instead of making judgments on how things should be. It includes concepts like agency theory, self-interest and contract theory. So what exactly is agency theory? Well, agency theory outlines the relationship between principals and agents. In our current financial situation, investors and shareholders act as the principal. They give responsibility to managers, who act as the agents. But this can cause conflicts of interest because the agent may not always act to benefit the principal. Did this contribute to the recent financial crisis? Absolutely. With all the subprime mortgages being handed out, it's easy to see that this agency relationship broke down. The shareholders trusted banks to issue securities of high quality. Little did they know, these bankers were acting in their own self-interest, and didn't really care about the shareholders. There was a lot of information asymmetry, because bankers knew the mortgages were faulty and didn't tell the investors. In fact, they actually used that information to benefit themselves, by betting against the bad mortgages. So how are we stopping agents from taking such selfish actions? Well, Larry, we were trying to align their actions with the investors' interests. Companies use bonuses to reward managers for making decisions that investors want. It's a win-win situation written right into the contract. This is another important concept of PAT, called contract theory. Interesting. And has PAT contributed to past financial issues too? Sure has. In 1929, when the market tanked, Citibank issued foreign bonds that were really low quality. The problem was, investors had no idea what they were buying. Contract theory backfired, because bankers got huge bonuses to sell these terrible securities, and acted in their own self-interest. Wow, that sounds like a huge conflict of interest. I appreciate you spending some time with us today, John G., and I hope other aspects of your life are more, positive. Ha 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 ha. His book is in stores April 15th. John G., everybody. Hey everybody, we're back from that commercial break and our next guest comes to us all the way from Sacramento, California. Please welcome Sandy Sugar.
Thanks Larry, it's great to be here today.
Sandy, you've gotten people pretty riled up with your thoughts on capital market research and accounting. Tell us a little about it.
Capital market research, or CMR for short, is used to discover mispriced securities. Researchers find the intrinsic value of an investment and compare it to the market value. In accounting, CMR is the study of how accounting disclosures affect security prices.
What's so controversial about that?
Well Larry, it's really because the rather uneducated public just doesn't understand the assumptions behind CMR.
Okay, why don't you enlighten us?
Well, first there's the efficient market hypothesis. It looks at the link between information and security prices. If strongly efficient, stock prices will include all relevant information. Investors will only make money based on the stock's underlying risk.
So you're saying there would be no extraordinary gains or losses?
Exactly.
Except that 4 million families have lost their homes since the last crash. Another 4.5 million have slipped into the foreclosure process or are seriously behind on their mortgage payments. Close to $11 trillion in individual wealth has been destroyed. That seems like a whole lot of loss to me.
Larry, you're looking at this all wrong. One outlying event does not discount the hypothesis entirely.
Okay, then how about the Great Depression, when financial losses skyrocketed? From September 1929 to July 1932, stocks on the New York Stock Exchange decreased in value by $74 billion.
I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Well, what about the rational actor assumption? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The rational actor assumption and the expected utility assumption are connected. Believers feel that investors are rational people who make expected utility calculations when choosing investments.
But don't you guys assume that people know enough to make these calculations? In 1929, most investors didn't have the knowledge they needed to effectively trade. Even right now, aren't the uneducated and low-income people the ones targeted for predatory lending practices?
You really like playing devil's advocate, don't you, Larry?
Not really. I just don't understand your point. If investors get completely unreliable information, then are those expected utility calculations even necessary?
Well, I cannot think of a single time when investors were given untrue information.
Sandy, you've got to be kidding. It happens all the frickin' time. How about the way Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac adjusted their allowance reserves so they could swing their way from a loss into a gain for the period?
I don't need to take this kind of emotional abuse.
And don't even get me started on the rational actor assumption. The 1929 collapse came after a whole era of completely unjustified optimism that drove people to invest. That's not rational at all.
Larry, do you have any idea how much money I make? Do you know how important I am? I certainly didn't come on this show to be criticized by some deadbeat wannabe news anchor. I'm Sandy Sugar, for God's sake.
I think this interview was over. Cut to commercial.
Kiss my...
Our next guest is currently a famous speaker known across the country for her knowledge of regulation theories. Please welcome Rita Summers. So Rita, how does regulation theory tie into the financial crisis?
Well, there are three theories that I want to talk about today. First is private interest theories, which don't encourage government regulation. Supporters think that the market can police itself, and that intervention just suppresses economic activity. Richard Whitney said exactly this in 1929, when he was president of the New York Stock Exchange.
Wait, so these theories tie all the way back to the 1929 crisis too?
It certainly seems that way, Larry. These theorists also look at regulatory capture. The idea is that the government might be swayed by large political and economic influences. And they do have a point. The financial industry spends billions in lobbying costs and political campaign contributions every year, so it seems they are making friends in the right places.
I'm sure you've heard of people say that President Obama's administration is a Wall Street government. What do you think about that?
Well, Obama's Treasury Secretary, Chief Economic Advisor and the head of the Federal Reserve are all former investment bank executives. The ties to Wall Street are pretty clear.
Wow, private interest theorists won't like that. But, with the recent financial crisis, don't you think there is a need for government intervention?
That's where public interest theory comes in. Public interest theorists think we need regulation to keep markets fair. There's some serious evidence that the markets aren't efficient, and they sure as hell aren't equitable. Legislation was passed after the crisis in 1929 to try and stop this.
So what happened?
In the 1980s, the Reagan administration limited the say of government in the marketplace again. Public theorists think that if we had kept strict regulation, the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis would never have happened.
So what else is stopping government regulation from being put in place?
Well, institutional theorists believe that normative forces in society that influence regulation. Alan Greenspan, who is the chairman of the Federal Reserve, had the power to stop to the runaway mortgage securitization train. He didn't use it, though, because of society's strong belief in the free market.
Riveting stuff, Rita. Wow. This could be the single most interesting interview I've ever done. And that includes that one time I interviewed Charlie Sheen. Ha 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 ha. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you to all my guests this evening. Have a good night.